media is supposed to be on Mark Carney's side, but for some reason, he's unable to really answer softball questions, and he's getting embarrassed at his own game, which is absolutely perfect. Welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to another video, everybody. Before we get into it, I do want to encourage you all to hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't already. It does really help grow the channel. And I want to encourage you guys, before the election is actually here, if you want to show your support with some awesome stickers, look at what I got out here on my microphone, and look at this one. Look how big these are too. Humongous. We also got Canada First. Canada First. You can get all these stickers in massive packs for 20% discount if you use code SAVE Canada. The link is going to be down below in the description. Just click the link, use the code, and there you go. Enjoy the shopping. We're taking a look at quite a few clips today, including a little bit of American news and how the tariffs are affecting basically the entire global market, what that means for Canada, Mark Carney's reaction to everything, and some other great stuff. So sit back, relax, and let's just get right into it. China and America trade and how President Trump is threatening additional tariffs. Here we go.
Against my statement, they put a 34% tariff on above what their ridiculous tariffs were already. And I said, if that tariff isn't removed by tomorrow at 12 o'clock, we're putting a 50% tariff on above the tariffs that we put on.
Yeah, E is for escalation, and there it is. Another look at the markets here. The TSX up by 180 points. The Dow is up by 754 points. A big rebound after a painful three-day sell-off, one of the worst in decades because of Donald Trump's trade war that he launched basically against the world last Wednesday. Now the president, you heard there, warning China to back down from its plan for counter tariffs on the United States. China signaling it has no plans to do so. So right now we are on the verge of a trade war. More tariffs are coming tomorrow, and the president basically saying if China doesn't back down, he would slap the Chinese with a 104% tariff if you add it all up. Let's bring in CTV's Scott Hurst. So topsy-turvy market yesterday. Now we're seeing a big rebound. Seems investors think there may be off-ramps, possible deals in the making.
Todd, a lot of concern, notably when we mention the potential standoff here against China. But when we look at the stock market today, what a difference a day can make compared to the last few days where we saw a significant sell-off. And so today, the stock market appears to be bouncing back. As we look at the live board of the Dow Jones, up 750 points today. The Toronto Stock Exchange, the TSX, up about 178 on rising hopes that the U.S. could reach trade deals, potentially lowering or lifting some tariffs over time. Now, we have heard from the U.S. president. He's been asked if he has any plans for a pause on the widespread tariffs. He says that's not something that they're looking at right now, as the U.S. president has shown few signs of backing down on the widespread tariffs, despite the mounting pressure on the financial markets, because we're also hearing from top administration officials that upwards of 50-plus countries targeted by U.S. President Donald Trump's new tariffs have reached out to potentially begin negotiations. And that has pumped up the markets a bit today after those significant losses over the last few days, Todd, on the heels of Donald Trump's announcement of sweeping so-called reciprocal tariffs on dozens of U.S. trading partners.
Yeah, and so we know that the U.S. and China are the world's two big economic superpowers. Trump has long had an issue with what he calls China's unfair trading practices, huge surpluses, flooding the world with cheap goods. Now he has this deadline here, and the Chinese don't seem to be blinking.
Todd, it appears that the Chinese are not backing down, so it looks like we are going to quite a significant standoff, as you mentioned, between the two world's largest economies. China's response really turning this into an ultimate trade showdown. Donald Trump threatening sweeping additional tariffs, upwards of 50%, if China doesn't pull back on its retaliation. He says the U.S. then will impose that 50% tariff on top of the so-called reciprocal tariffs that were announced last week. The Commerce Ministry said the imposition of so-called reciprocal tariffs on China are completely groundless, and calling this a bullying practice by the U.S., saying its countermeasures are aimed at safeguarding its own interests. Smartphones, computers, lithium-ion batteries, toys, video game consoles. That makes up the bulk of Chinese exports to the U.S., and China has already announced retaliatory tariffs, and the ministry hinted its latest statement that more may be coming. So even though we are seeing some hope on the stock market that some deals could be made, when it comes to these sweeping reciprocal tariffs, it appears the two largest economies are heading to a significant standoff in this trade dispute, Todd.
All right, Scott Hurst. Thanks, Scott.
Thanks, Todd.
It's gonna be crazy. It really comes down to two countries in the trade war, because you already have a lot of countries that are backing down from tariffs with America. Vietnam surrendered. Australia said they're not doing any reciprocal or retaliation towards America. What was it? Zimbabwe said that they are not retaliating. And this morning also you have South Korea said that they're not retaliating. They're going to be dropping tariffs. So a lot of countries are kissing the ring essentially and bowing down to America. And I've posted earlier this morning on X about my opinions with this. And I really think that you're going to see China and Canada as the last to fall when it comes to removing any sort of tariffs against America. And that's just the way it is. You could be a Canadian patriot, but you can also support the world superpower, America. And that's currently where I stand. I want the best for Canada, but I also understand that there's a massive shift right now in terms of who has the most power. And do I want that to be China or Russia, or would I want that to be in America where we just so happen to border? And the answer is yes, I want that to remain in America. So it's a massive showdown right now for the trade war, and it could be a shotgun type of match. It could be very quick, could end in days or weeks, or it could be dragged out for months. I don't know if it'll happen for years, though, but we're going to have to wait and see how this does play out. Next up, we've got Mark Carney, who's being covered by CNN. Very, very weird. And what he has to say about Orange Man bad. Let's take a look.
The world woke up to some pretty dramatic moves, and they're ongoing in financial markets. So before I get to the main subject at hand, I want to spend a few moments talking about what that means for us in Canada. And I think the first observation is what's going on is a direct consequence of President Trump's unjustified tariffs against Canada, tariffs that were first.
So they're trying to start to build the narrative that it's unjustified and illegal, just like they did with the Russian war, the unjustified invasion by Russia, the illegal invasion by Russia. And the wording of it is just so weird. I don't agree with the tariffs on Canada. I don't agree with this trade war that Canada and America are getting in against with each other, but it's just so weird, the anti-American rhetoric that's now coming from our Canadian politicians.
Levied on Canada and Mexico, and then on the world. And those measures are going to hit a lot of people's savings, including their retirement savings. And as much as this is unfortunate, it was not unforeseen. This is what we have been concerned about. And indeed, this is what we've been trying to warn the President of the United States about. And I'm not going to sugarcoat it. There may be some tough days ahead for Canadians, but I also want to reassure that we are prepared. We foresaw this. And borrowing on my experience helping to guide Canada through the 2008 financial crisis and helping the United Kingdom weather the impacts of Brexit, we have been taking steps, and we are continuing to take steps to protect Canadians. What you worry about in these types of situations, if you are charged with overseeing financial markets, are there problems that are being created by the markets themselves, the banks themselves? Are there weaknesses? We do not see that. We have rock solid financial institutions in this country, so they're not making it worse. Okay? So, but what is happening in the markets is they are reacting to what we have warned about, which is that these tariffs are fundamentally damaging to the American economy and by extension to the global economy. So what needs to be done in a situation like this is, yes, there's a lot of technical things and liquidity and lots of work, that needs to be done to make sure the markets function, and the markets don't make it worse. I have confidence in the Governor of the Bank of Canada, Minister of Finance. They're on top of it. and also have confidence in Canadian institutions. So Canadians can be reassured on that. But what you need to do in a crisis, and I've long experience in this, is you need to meet it with overwhelming force. You need to meet it with overwhelming force. And the situation at the heart of this is uncertainty about U.S. policy, or to make it worse, is greater certainty that U.S. policy will be self-harming to the American economy, and therefore the global economy, if the U.S. doesn't walk back from this tariff policy. We can't control the United States. We can't control President Trump's decision. We can speak, and we do, and influence, inform. We can control what we do here in this country, and that's why we're being clear about, and we've been clear from the start, in terms of the huge payback if we have one Canadian economy, not 13. The huge payback for major projects of national interest. The ability to catalyze investment in this country of all sorts, and the importance of diversifying our trading relationships around the world. And I will say in the last 48 hours, I've had a series of conversations around exactly, well, in fact, all of those aspects. Sorry, David, I'll hand back. But, so the way we need, and what Canadians, I think the core message to Canadians is something I've said over and again, but I want to really emphasize. We can give ourselves far more than the U.S. can take away. So the U.S. is driving itself into a recession, pressure on the world, if the U.S. doesn't change course. But what we can control is where we invest here, how we support our people, and that's what we're doing.
Do you anticipate Canada and or North?
It's weird that he's selective on when he chooses to talk about the financial crisis that happened in 2008. He goes around and he says that there was no crisis. Canada's never had a financial crisis. He's said that. And then he also says that he steered us out of this in 2007, 2008. Very, very weird. He had that just wasn't him. It wasn't him. During the financial crisis, Harper yesterday said that that's not true. Harper was the prime minister during the crisis. Harper steered us out of the crisis. I mean, this guy, he just makes things up to fit his narrative. Super weird and disingenuous. Well, I guess it's not that weird. He's a liberal, right? And this is what they do. They bend the truth to fit their narrative instead of sticking to the objective truth. My goodness, I'm so sick and tired of these people.
North America entering a recession? Has that likelihood increased? And 3, what steps might a government take to, like you did in 08-09, make sure we come out of that recession more rapidly?
Exactly the right question. In terms of, yes, the probability of a recession in the United States has gone up significantly. You see that from independent commentators, and something that we had warned about, and I take no joy in that it becoming more likely. That will have significant effects on the Canadian economy. It's very hard for us to avoid that area. That's part of the reason why in advance of this election we made the changes to EI to make it more generous. It's part of the reason why we made the changes to provide liquidity to Canadian companies so they're not pulling back unnecessarily. And I think that we're at a situation where those steps will help provide for companies the financing that's necessary in order to do. There's other things that can be done on the margin. What we're going to need to do, though, government, what Canadians will choose their government in a few weeks. My judgment, my government will act with force. We will accelerate major investments. We will provide very clear guidelines on where we're going to spend money, where the returns are going to be for the private sector, where we're going to take regulations away. I'll give you one example to make that tangible, David, but there are many more. We announced at the first ministers' meeting 2 weeks ago, 10 days ago, just before calling the election, that we will remove all federal barriers to interprovincial trade, mobility, and by Canada Day. We will table that legislation by Canada Day. We've left instructions for the...
They've had 10 years to do it. They've had 10 years to do it. And Trudeau literally gave himself emergency powers to do this. You know what could have been the biggest thing for the Liberals in the most positive way is during COVID, when everything happened, instead of using their powers for evil, they could have used their powers for good and removed intraprovincial trade barriers for services and given healthcare professionals, nurses, paramedics, doctors the ability to be transient around our country without any border restrictions by provincial or territorial borders. They had the opportunity. It was right there. It was given to them on a silver platter. And instead, they used all their harms or all their powers for evil. Absolutely insane. They've had 10 years to do this. They literally gave themselves emergency powers. And they haven't done nothing. And same thing here in British Columbia. David Eby, our premier, gave himself emergency powers till the year 2027. And what has he done for intraprovincial trade barriers and services? Nothing. Nothing. These corrupt people don't actually care about solving the issues. It's nuts. It's like the pharmaceutical industry. They just want to sell you a Band-Aid solution so you keep coming back for more. It's so gross, man. It angers me so much, too.
Officials to be developing that. We, as the Liberal Party, are developing that. And the first item of business, if we are returned, is going to be accelerating that, because that's the kind of certainty that you help to provide for business to make those investments. And Canada moves forward as Canada, not reading Truth Social and X and watching tweets down there. We'll take charge.
The U.S. has announced its intention to raise softwood lumber duties from 14.5% to 34.45%, which would be an enormous hit on an industry that is already struggling in BC with lowered supply and job losses. It's something the Premier says that he'll be talking to you about later today. What's your message to forestry workers in this province, and what do you plan to do in terms of supporting the industry and workers who are at this point worried about the feasibility of their jobs moving forward?
Okay, well, thank you for the question. And I start where you ended up, which is it starts with workers. It starts with workers and working back from workers, and our commitment in this trade battle, and our commitment more generally, is to support workers. These tariffs are wholly unjustified. They came through a USTR process, but they're wholly unjustified. And I recognize that there's 50,000 workers that are affected by this. I recognize the importance of this industry. I've known it my whole life. The importance of this industry and the contribution to this province and this country. So I am very focused on this issue. Premier Eby and I will be discussing specific measures that can be taken. We have made very clear that we will act. We have a strategy to fight, protect, and build. And we are fighting unjustified tariffs. This is another unjustified tariff. You can expect us to fight against it, and you can expect us to take specific steps to protect those workers.
Gross. I am just so disgusted and demoralized when he talks. When Mark Carney talks, when the Liberals talk, I don't want to say I hate Canada, but I hate them speaking about Canada. It doesn't make me excited to be living in Canada. It doesn't make me excited for the future of this country. It just angers me. It makes my blood boil because they have caused so much damage over the last 10 years. These people are full of false promises. We're going to do this and we're going to do that. And trust us, even though we've had time, we're sorry, but not sorry for not prioritizing those issues. But trust us, keep us in power. And now we're going to make those changes that we promised 10 years ago. I don't like it. I don't trust it. It absolutely stinks. And since we're on the topic of those things, who better yet than to look at Doug Ford next? Let's take a look at what the fat pig with rabies mentality, the fat pig mentality with rabies has to say about what's going on with America.
To recruit world-leading scientists to join the fantastic team here at UHN. And we're going to put an ad together. We have one on hold, as I was telling the team before we came out here, that, we're going to go on many fronts to fight these tariffs. But one way to win big time is to get the brightest minds in the United States to come to the greatest sub-sovereign nation in the world, and that's Ontario. And we'll be running those ads, and I can tell you, the president won't be happy as we could, call it the brain drain to the greatest country in the world, and that's Canada. And that's not just in healthcare, but in every single sector. I had an opportunity to meet a doc from Florida. He was up visiting family, and he came here, and then he ended up moving down to the U.S. So he has a practice in California, and he's saying, I'm itching to come back, but there's so much paperwork and red tape to get back there. One call to my great minister, and we're moving that forward. We're going to clean up all the paper and red tape, and we know that graduated here in Canada and then moved down there, or graduated from one of the great medical schools in the U.S. They're good enough to practice there. They're good enough to come here. We're doing that for doctors and nurses.
Oh my goodness, man. These people have had, they gave themselves emergency powers. So did Doug Ford. And it just angers me when they talk about healthcare, doctors and nurses, because they could have broken down all the interprovincial trade barriers during COVID. They had the literal best opportunity then. Expedite Red Seal or Blue Seal qualifications for immigrants that are coming here that are literally qualified in our healthcare system, that are healthcare professionals from other countries, because there was a massive worldwide healthcare crisis. And no, they didn't use it. They weren't thinking about that. Why can me behind my computer, who may or may not be wearing pants? I'm wearing pants. Don't worry, folks. I'm wearing pants. I don't know why I keep making that joke, because sometimes I don't wear pants, but I'm wearing pants today. Trust me. Why is it that me sitting behind my computer can come up with these ideas that can literally solve an entire industry of this country? Get our politicians that are paid the big bucks to represent our country, either provincially, municipally, or freaking federally. They can't come up with this. And they have all the advisors in the world, hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars at their disposal. And they can't come up with these simple solutions or these ideas. They haven't been talking about it. I've never once heard any politician come out and say, you know what? The best time to have broken down all those trade barriers, interprovincial trade barriers for services, especially for healthcare, would have been during COVID. That would have been the best time. Not one single politician has come out and said that. So why is it that Mistersunshinebaby can come up with this, but our freaking government can't? It's quite honest. It's a little pathetic. It's very frustrating. It makes me feel like a genius. It gives me the validation that, hey, maybe I actually have some decent ideas, and our government isn't as smart as what we think they are. And that's been the problem, is we've been asleep at the wheel for decades. Maybe you haven't, but I have. And a lot of people that I know and people that like me have been asleep, but we've just trusted the system. We've trusted the government. And me working in the military, I've absolutely trusted the government. I've trusted our system, that our politicians, our government, that they're there to help us, which is literally the most frightening words you could hear in today's day and age. I'm here to help you. Hi, I'm from the government and I'm here to help you. Nobody wants to hear that. Those are like the final words you hear in your life. So very, very spooky stuff. But now we're going to shift over to something that's a little bit more positive. Sort of. We have another clip here of CTV analysts for what they are thinking is going to happen with this ongoing trade war and how it's going to affect Canada. Here we go.
Pedro Antunes is the chief economist with the Conference Board of Canada. Pedro, good to see you. Your takeaways of what we're seeing on the markets.
Well, I think we're seeing markets essentially coming to realize that this trade war may be in fact on, and it may be on for a good long time. We're still very hopeful that we'll see some negotiations here happening and some relief on some of those tariffs, especially between the U.S. and some of the other major economies, the EU, Japan, China, et cetera. But it's just looking more and more acrimonious. And that is, I think, very concerning for all of us, and markets are reacting to that.
Yeah, and I'm curious as well. We know that the president hit China, Pedro, with tariffs last Wednesday. There were already 20% tariffs on the Chinese. Then President Trump added another 34% to get you to 54%. And then today he sent out this, and he said, look, if the Chinese don't back down with their retaliatory tariffs, I'm going to slap them with 50% more. And if I'm not mistaken, Pedro, that would be a tariff of about 104% on Chinese imports. I mean, are we looking at a trade war here? Is this what's going on?
Well, this is exactly it, and again, this is just devastating to essentially we have right there the two biggest economies in the world at current exchange rates. The U.S. is still the biggest economy in the world; it accounts for about a quarter, but China's right up there in second place. And you can imagine those two economies over the last 30 years have been developing trade ties, intricate trade ties that have, on the one hand, helped the U.S. consumers, U.S. households gain a lot of purchasing power by, essentially sending production of goods to the most efficient, cheapest place, really. And the Chinese have benefited from bringing millions of people out of poverty, essentially, and creating an economy that's been very, very prosperous over the last 30 years. It's been a win-win. Now, to dismantle that and go the other way is a lose-lose. And this is what we're seeing between the two world's biggest economies. And of course, that is going to have repercussions for the entire globe, really, including here in Canada. We're already seeing the effects of a global slowdown on commodity prices. That's going to take a bite out of our income. And of course, if the U.S. Consumer slows down, U.S. investment slows down, you know how tied we are to that economy with respect to our trade, irregardless of tariffs, right? So this is very, very concerning.
Absolutely. Higher prices, potentially higher inflation, job losses, people's portfolios tanking, certainly right now as they watch this turmoil on the markets. And then, of course, the big fear here, Pedro, I know you're looking at this closely, that Trump will push his own country and the world into a recession.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's essentially the outcome of this. President Trump on that day, Liberation Day, I hate to call it that, but he actually talked about how the U.S. has been suffering over the last 30 years from free trade, but that's absolutely not true. The U.S. has had the most productive economy in the world. It is, in essence, the richest economy in the world of any size, in any case. And it's done terrifically well. Investment is very high. And in fact, a lot of that investment happens because, essentially, big capital is attracted to move money into the U.S. to take advantage and to benefit and to also grow that economy. So to talk about the last 30 years as being, a loss for the U.S., to talk about trade deficits as being some kind of subsidy is just complete nonsense, and it goes against the grain of anything that's sensible here and in terms of what we've seen for the U.S. economy over the past 30 years. If the objective here is to hurt China, then that's a different story. And of course, that causes its own pain, and this is what we're seeing with these tariffs. It's just very concerning. Again.
We were showing some of those protests that happened over the U.S. The first big sign that we've seen, as people are now demonstrating, organizing, and protesting against President Trump, not just his
the hands-off protests,
big, but a lot of other policies as well. I've got one other question. I mean, it seems to me, Pedro, the president, his strategy is the following: he wants companies to come back to the United States. He wants things built in the U.S. He wants supply chains, rewired, reoriented toward the United States. But I mean, he's only president for another 3 years, 3.5 years. How realistic is it to think that companies will actually do what he says, close their plants in their home countries, open up new plants in the U.S. and start hiring? I mean, I would assume that takes a long time for that to happen.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, I was of the opinion that this, again, was a strategy, more bark than bite. And so not actually implying tariffs, but just talking about tariffs, threatening companies to not have access to the U.S. consumer. That on its own had moved investment. Certainly when we renegotiated, or prior to renegotiating our NAFTA agreement back in 2016, we saw firsthand some of the angst that caused Canadian businesses. And we did see businesses move their investment, their production south. But to do this on a global scale, that is not going to work. What's going to happen here is the U.S. would end up, especially if you're actually applying the tariffs, the bite of tariffs, what's going to happen? Well, you're going to end up with inflation. You're going to end up with all this uncertainty, including in the U.S. You're going to end up with a recession possibly in the U.S. economy. And I can tell you one thing that does not attract investment is uncertainty and a slowdown in economic activity. That is going to scare investment away. And so this is not going to work, not in the way it's being being brought about right now.
Pedro Antunes, which is chief economist at the Conference Board of Canada. It's always great to have you part of our coverage here, Pedro.
I mean, we're going to have to see how these tariffs do play out, but so far the market has not responded favorably. There's so much panic and it's a sea of red. And when it comes down to it, it's really going to be a trade war between America and China, and the first to back down loses. And I do not foresee America being the ones to back down by removing any sort of tariffs. And so it could be days, it could be weeks, it could be months. I don't know if it'll be years, but it'll be quite some time of pain before there's a lot of gain coming from this trade war. And in terms of Canada's position on it, we're going to have to wait and see how this does play out. Hopefully with a conservative government, especially a majority government, you'll have better relations between Trump and, you know, future Prime Minister Pierre Poilievre, but we're going to just have to wait and see how this does play out. That, ladies and gentlemen, concludes this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, it'd be super awesome for you guys to show your appreciation by hitting the like button, subscribing to the channel. It's absolutely free to do. I look forward to seeing you all in the next video. Bye for now.